The prosecutor smirked, the judge barely looked up, and the officers sat back, awaiting the gavel to seal another conviction. But just as the verdict was about to drop, the defendant made a move that no one saw coming. Elijah Bennett never imagined his weekend trip to Birmingham, Alabama, would end in handcuffs. He had flown in for a guest lecture at the University of Alabama, a straightforward engagement on criminal justice reform, ironic given what was about to happen. It started after dinner, when he had just left a small soul food spot downtown, where an older couple recognized him from a panel discussion a few months earlier. They had talked about systemic issues, the work that still needed to be done. Elijah was familiar with these conversations. What he wasn't prepared for was what happened next. As Elijah crossed the street toward his rental car, flashing blue and red lights made him pause. A patrol car sped up, tires screeching to a halt. "Hands where I can see them." The voice was sharp, commanding. Elijah barely had time to register the unfolding scene before two officers, both white, both young, jumped out, guns drawn. "Sir, what's this about?" Elijah asked steadily, hands raised. He had taught students how to handle police encounters, studied every angle of these situations, but theory and reality were vastly different. "Shut up, turn around, hands on the car," another officer ordered sharply, stepping out of the patrol car, older, heavier, smirking in a way that made Elijah's stomach churn. He watched helplessly as one of the younger cops pulled out a small plastic bag containing white powder. "Look at that," the older officer chuckled. "What do we got here?" Elijah's body stiffened. Planted evidence. He had seen the cases, read the reports, even worked on overturning convictions based on this exact scenario. And now it was happening to him. "That's not mine." He forced himself to remain calm. "You know that's not mine." The officer tilted his head, amusement flickering in his eyes. "Is that right?" He turned to his partner. "What do you think, Parker?" "Think he's telling the truth." "Not a chance," Officer Miller replied with a grin. "Looks guilty to me." The handcuffs clicked around Elijah's wrists. Passers-by stopped to watch. A few recorded with their phones. But the officers were unconcerned. They had done this before. "Please, let me record," a woman started, but the older officer interrupted sharply. "Back up, ma'am, unless you want to join him." Elijah's mind raced. He could fight back, not physically but legally, logically. He could insist they check for fingerprints, review body cam footage, call a lawyer, but he knew how this game played out. They would turn off cameras, evidence would disappear, charges would stick. So he stayed quiet. In the patrol car, the older cop sat in the front seat, whistling. "You got family, son." Elijah ignored him. "Funny," the cop continued. "All you boys got the same story. I didn't do it, I was just minding my business." Same tired lines. Officer Miller laughed. "Maybe we should start betting on which one we'll hear next." Elijah stared out the window, fists clenched. He wanted to tell them who he was, wanted to see their faces when they realized. But not yet. They thought they'd won. They had no idea what was coming. The Jefferson County Courthouse was packed, reporters, attorneys, law students observing. It wasn't unusual. Cases like this always drew crowds. A black man accused of drug possession, a swift trial, a predictable outcome. Elijah sat calmly at the defense table, while his public defender, a young, overworked attorney named Jason Tanner, nervously flipped through paperwork. "I've seen these cases before," Jason whispered. "Judge Walters isn't lenient. Take the deal." "And what's the deal?" Elijah asked. 5 years. Maybe 3 if you keep quiet." 3 years, Elijah repeated smoothly. "For something I didn't do?" Brian shifted uncomfortably, looking at the prosecution's table where Assistant DA Connor Mitchell chatted casually with the arresting officers, Sergeant Brent Matthews, Officer Miller, and Officer Jennings. "You fight, you risk 20, Brian whispered urgently. Elijah eyed the officers. They looked confident, not even pretending to be worried. Sergeant Matthews smirked, shaking his head slightly. "A silent message. Don't even try." Elijah took a deep breath. "Let's go to trial." Brian paused, then nodded reluctantly. "All right." Judge Howard Prescott entered the courtroom, known for swift sentencing. "Let's make this quick," he muttered. Mitchell rose confidently, laying out the state's evidence clearly. Elijah tuned him out, already knowing the script. The prosecution called Officer Denton first, who detailed discovering drugs during a routine search. A small bag containing cocaine, he stated. Elijah glanced at Brian, who offered no objection. The officers, Sergeant Matthews, Officer Miller, Officer Denton, testified confidently. Sergeant Matthews claimed everything was by the book, no misconduct. Elijah watched silently as Brian, his public defender, barely cross-examined. No further questions, Brian conceded. Elijah felt the jury's silent judgment. They had already decided. Mitchell rested his case, confident. Brian offered a weak defense. My client maintains innocence. Judge Prescott was ready to conclude when Elijah stood, politely interrupting. Your attorney had his turn, Prescott said, annoyed. Understand, Elijah said calmly. But I'd like to introduce myself properly. Elijah stood slowly, reaching into his jacket, the same jacket where they planted evidence, and pulled out his credentials, flipping open a leather ID. The courtroom gasped. A gold badge bearing 3 bold letters, FBI. I'm Special Agent Elijah Dawson, he announced clearly. And I have evidence against those who intended to frame me. Silence filled the courtroom. Elijah revealed a recorder, pressing play. Sergeant Matthews' voice echoed clearly. You know, it's funny. All you boys got the same story. Sergeant Matthews paled visibly. I have hours of this, Elijah stated calmly. Body cam footage, dash cams, witness statements. The courtroom exploded into chaos. Federal agents entered, cuffing the officers. Judge Prescott and Mitchell watched in disbelief. Elijah turned to Mitchell, voice firm. You've built a career looking away. Not this time. Mitchell stammered. I had no idea. Save it. Elijah interrupted. This corruption goes deeper than one arrest. Judge Prescott, shaken, stared at Elijah, who stepped forward. You signed off on cases like mine countless times. This isn't just about me. Agents escorted the officers out, now defeated. Elijah turned to Brian, advising firmly, find a new job. The whispers followed Elijah as he exited, but he didn't look back. This wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. Justice isn't just about what's written in law. It's about accountability. Elijah knew that change required courage. So ask yourself, how many Elijah Coles were there? How many never got a fight back? Justice changes only when people aren't afraid to challenge it. If you believe in justice, share this story. Speak up, because silence only protects the guilty. Subscribe for more stories.